The CoinDesk Spotlight is brought to you by Nexo, the place to earn on Bitcoin, Ethereum, and more.
As the crypto industry is still reeling from the fallout of the whole UST debacle, the next question is, how will regulators react? Most specifically, will we see regulation for algorithmic stablecoins? Joining us to discuss is Ron Hammond, Director of Government Relations at the Blockchain Association. Welcome, Ron.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Perfect time to have you here. I'm really curious to hear how you explain this. So let's just start out with just the big picture. I saw some of your tweets from, I think, yesterday. Tell us about what is the reaction in DC? Because what's interesting about this UST implosion is that the crypto community is kind of obsessed with it, but a lot of people, I think, just don't even know what it is, right? So you mentioned that there is a reaction in DC. You compared it to Libra. Are regulators or lawmakers, do they understand what's going on? Do they understand what happened? And are they freaked out by it?
Definitely. I think you can easily say that there is a pretty adverse reaction right now here in DC to the whole Terra situation. And there was definitely a lot of folks who were monitoring it, both in Congress and on the regulatory side. And even before the crash, there was some interest in algorithmic stablecoins for quite some time. However, I will say it was mostly largely focused on the single fiat-backed currency. So the USDCs, Tether in particular. Tether got a lot of attention here in DC. I did a few meetings with the Terra folks, as well as, I know the DAI folks have been on the Hill and a few other folks in the algorithmic space. But I will say that for the large part, Congress decided that we should take this one bite-sized chunk at a time. And so for the longest time, it was Libra that dominated the headlines. And then they moved over to USDC and Tether. And now algos have taken up a lot of the conversations. But candidly, most folks on Capitol Hill, they know algos are different from USDC, but they really don't know exactly that there's multiple types of algorithmic stablecoins out there. And they don't know the difference between like DAI, for example, and UST. So that's a lot on us on the lobbying side. We got to make sure we just at least educate the policymakers to understand that there is a difference between these folks. One thing I will highlight, though, in particular, is that Secretary Yellen of the Treasury testified in front of Congress in both the House and the Senate last week. And this is all during the crash. And so this is a lot of folks who are asking questions on this matter. A lot of it is really organic questions. These weren't planned questions or coming from different groups or organizations. These were just legitimate curiosity. What are you doing in this space when it comes to regulating stablecoins? And Secretary Yellen said multiple times, we came up with recommendations in the presidential working group. That's the Biden administration's plans to regulate stablecoins. But it's up to Congress, though, to pass those rules. And they don't have to exactly be what the Biden administration recommended. However, it needs to come from Congress. And Congress does act pretty slow. So there's a lot of pressure right now on Capitol Hill to act, but also there's a lot of pressure from folks on Capitol Hill to the regulators saying, we need you guys to prevent something like this from happening. And so it's kind of like, the catch-22 here. So do we go after actively the bad guys here, or those who are not being so truthful to investors? Or do we put together a framework here and at least understand what can and can't work in the United States? And I think that's more what Congress will be going towards, but there's a lot of politics in play, and that's been really complicating a lot of stuff. But I will say that stablecoins did dominate a lot of our conversations all of 2022, and it looks like it'll be continuing that for quite some time.
So, Ron, I'm really happy you're here because I really hope you can answer this question that I have not been able to get an answer to. So we have seen a lot of talk about regulating stablecoins over the past year. There's been various reports, but regulating algorithmic stablecoins specifically, could you just go through what even the menu of options are? How do you regulate algorithmic stablecoins? Because as you just said, they are somewhat different animals. So when people say, okay, we're going to start regulating this, what does that even mean? What are some of the options for regulating algorithmic stablecoins that you've heard tossed around?
Well, actually, that's the funny part about it, is that there have not been many conversations on regulating algorithmic stablecoins. For the longest time, even in the Biden administration's plan, in the presidential working group, they barely touch algorithmic stablecoins. They said, there's this thing here, algos, we know they're more complicated, we'll get to that down the road. And a long time in Congress, too, we were having the same conversation, saying, look, let's go after the biggest large market players here, the Tethers, the USDCs, just making sure we have a regulatory framework here. I will say Tether is very unpopular on Capitol Hill between both Republicans and Democrats. But USDC has been seen as a really good innovation, for example. And that's not just them, but that's one big, large example. It's been here on Capitol Hill and it's testified several times. But algos are really outside the purview. And again, most folks did not really deal with it, besides a few staffers and members of Congress until last week. I can say right now that there is a briefing that's going to be happening on the Democrat side of the aisle on what happened, what is it? And it's not with Terra, it's with a lot of folks in the stablecoin realm and those who are for stablecoins or CBDCs, and then those who are and not for either. So this is the kind of perspective that Capitol Hill wants to learn more about. And I think that's a really important thing to highlight, is that Congress does take a long time to get policy passed, but they're taking a really hard look at making sure that they understand the issue fully before diving headfirst into it, which is good. And I think that should be really welcomed. We don't want to be regulating off emotions here, or what happened last week. We want to make sure we have a comprehensive framework, and it's bipartisan. And I can say for sure that I'm talking to a lot of offices on both sides of the aisle, and there has been some really positive steps here. I think we'll see some bills introduced pretty soon. But candidly, though, I'm not sure many are going to touch algorithmic stablecoins at the moment, because a lot of folks are still scrambling, saying, how do you regulate this? How do you regulate an algorithm? This is really complicated. We really haven't thought about this. Do we need to pause and address this down the road? They really don't know, candidly. So this is a tough position right now for Congress. And the less and less Congress acts, it gives more leeway to the regulators, which are a lot harder, more to control, but also to map out exactly what they're going to do. So we really hope that the states and Congress is correct.
So how would you do it? I mean, like, you're talking to people on the Hill, you're having conversations. I'm going to make a broad assumption here that your idea is that less regulation better, and fewer laws better. Nonetheless, it's still something Congress wants to do, and they see something, they want to regulate it or tax it or destroy it or ban it or whatever it is. That's just what that's what they like. That's their job. I mean, that's what they think their job is. But what is it that, when you sit down with them, what is it you're telling them to do? Hey, don't touch the algos at all. It's fine. Everything's good. Or is it like, yeah, this is a real problem because it's messing up everything for everyone, or in between? What exactly are you saying here to them?
Well, first of all, we actually are advocating for regulation and for legislation. There's some folks saying that the entire lobbyist job is to prevent laws from happening, but actually I'd say it's the opposite. We actually want regulatory clarity. We want to have a framework in place. So these businesses that we represent, the Blockchain Association represents 90 plus companies now, and they want regulatory certainty. So at least they know the bounds in which they can operate their business. And that's really important, because if they don't know, if it changes from one administration to the other, or the Congress flips and the other party is not so friendly, that creates an environment of uncertainty, and they're just going to go to other countries that have a lot more regulatory certainty in place. And a lot of that comes from legislation passed into law. And so it's really rare for, lobbyists to be advocating for regulation, but that's what we do. And most of that comes from education and explaining what this realm is, because it's so complicated. And in the realm of financial services, so go ahead.
How do you want the algos regulated?
It's still tough. I think right now we need to have some regulatory oversight. There probably should be definitely some audits and looking at the reserves here. That's been a huge focus in Congress right now, is focus on audits and reserves. A lot of that was tied to Tether. But I think now having a full-on audit of the algorithm, for example, will be something that a lot of folks on the Hill on both sides of the aisle will be open to. I will say the backing right now in Congress on both sides of the aisle, a lot of folks are saying it needs to be fiat currencies or cash and cash equivalents. They don't like the idea of the Libra model of having a multi-currency basket. They're not too comfortable with having cryptocurrency as a reserve as well. So these are two areas right now that I think there might be some differences where some more pro-crypto members might deviate a tad, but for the general most part, fiat currency and cash equivalents are what they want for reserves, and they want regular quarterly or monthly audits, whether that be of the actual reserves or whether actually the algorithm itself. So that's one area that they're looking at. But again, it's still very, very far away from coming up to a concrete idea. Again, for the longest time, we were focused on that single fiat-backed currency, and that was a huge focus for Capitol Hill for quite some time. And then the Russia-Ukraine situation happened, and I would have said 3 months ago, we would have some stablecoin legislation make its way through Congress in some shape or form. Ukraine happened, that kind of cratered it. Now I've put it back at 20%, 10% chance of something happening in this space. But again, algos are so complicated, and Congress has a very short amount of time before the election. It's going to be really hard to get this across the finish line.
Sounds like you're blaming Putin.
Maybe it just...
No, I mean,
you sound like President Biden you're blaming him for inflation and this too.
Well, Congress tends to be really focused on what's the hot topic at the time, so it happens.
Well, one question here, though. I mean, some of what you're talking about, these possible fixes, might actually negate the whole concept of an algorithmic stable period. So I guess just throwing out a question here, is there any possibility that algorithmic stablecoins would actually be banned just because it's like too much trouble to figure them out?
that has been a knee-jerk reaction in this space for quite some time, saying like, and this has gone all the way back to 2012. I don't get it, let's ban it. But we kind of got over that stage, I'd say probably in 2016, 2017. When I was on the Hill, I noticed there was a certain point that like, we've crossed the Rubicon, this is here to stay. Algorithmic stablecoins have not reached that point yet. Stablecoins generally have, I believe, but not algos right now. And I think a lot of folks are still kind of wondering what's going on, how are we going to be able to have these exist in this current ecosystem and be able to regulate them properly, because we've seen that they're very harmful and they get depegged several times, unfortunately. So we're not there yet. I think we have to still give that use case of why do you need an algorithmic stablecoin? Who uses it? Why is it important? Telling Congress that traders use it is not really an appealing topic. But if you say, hey, retail investors use it, or there are underserved populations that use it, and here's why. And again, those use cases may or may not be built out for some of these algos. But right now, Congress is still scratching their head saying, why do we need this? But I will say, to the credit of other stablecoin issuers out there and those who are involved in stablecoin policy, they're not calling for bans either. They're not lobbying like the banks are, saying, hey, only banks can issue stablecoins, or we must ban all these things. They're doing a good job being very inclusive of the space and saying, we should embrace competition. We should embrace having multiple projects out here on the stablecoin front that look different from each other. But of course, you need to have those guardrails in place. And I think that still has yet to be determined how algos still fit in that mold. But I wouldn't say a ban right now, but you'll see some rhetoric coming out pretty soon, probably on that from some members on the Democrat side. But it's the Elizabeth Warrens, the Brad Shermans, folks that we're very familiar with, at least on the crypto side of things.
Ron, finally, I just want to pivot to another subject that has Congress's attention, and that's FTX. And Sam Bankman-Fried, the CEO there, his proposal to basically disrupt the whole trading, derivatives trading world, with especially with the CFTC, in that they want to directly clear margin-backed swaps trades. And I wonder, how do you see that proceeding, the reaction, and could it, how do you see things going?
Yeah, so I'll give credit to FTX, and they're not a member of the Blockchain Association, by the way, but I will give credit to FTX and SBF in particular. They have made themselves available, especially SBF, to Capitol Hill very frequently. I mean, he is here all the time. If you look the other way, I can see the Capitol from my apartment, but he is here all the time, meeting with policymakers, staff, being as available as possible. And I think that really shows why FTX has been able to really build up a huge presence here in DC and get a hearing on this proposal of theirs. Now, mind you, that came at the request of their opponents, and Representative Scott, who chairs that committee, who had that hearing, represents ICE in his district. So he's very much keen to their concerns and their needs. But the fact that SBF and FTX have been able to really push their brand, as also to push a policy proposal this far in Congress, is pretty remarkable. Will they be successful? Has yet to be seen, because the CFTC and the Ag Committee, which oversees it, they're still very much learning about this issue, whereas other committees like Financial Services, which oversees the SEC, for example, they're way more in the weeds on this. They have been for years. And we've been seeing a push from a lot of the members on that committee saying, look, we understand this issue way more. This belongs in our jurisdiction. So it's kind of like a high school, candidly, where there's a lot of turf wars here. People want a certain piece of the pie. We've seen that play on the regulatory side with SEC and CFTC with Gensler and Benham. I think this is going to be a trend that continues for quite some time. But at least at the proposal, we will see that gets a lot of accomplishment here. I think a lot of lies in the regulatory side, because like I said, Congress is going to be pretty much in campaign mode, pretty much starting at the end of the month. And that's when everything turns to hyperbole, rhetoric, and a lot of legislation and ideas kind of get tossed out the window until next year. And again, it's just generally what happens, but that's what happens during a election cycle.